The takeaway is to wake up, to become conscious of where you're from, what your past is, what you're afraid of, what you crave, and use your memory to liberate yourself.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. From the streets of a struggling Boston neighborhood to the operating rooms of middle America, today's guest has lived a story that's as inspiring as it's revealing. In his memoir, Steep, A Black Neurosurgeon's Journey, Dr. Craig Yorke takes us inside a life shaped not just by ambition and achievement, but by the emotional price of success. This isn't simply a story about breaking barriers, it's a deeply personal journal about resilience, identity, and what it truly means to chase the American dream. Dr. Yorke is a graduate of Boston Latin School and Harvard University, trained in San Francisco, and he made the bold decision to build a neurosurgical practice in Topeka, Kansas, where he found opportunity and purpose at the renowned Menninger Foundation. Today, we talk about his remarkable path, the lessons he learned along the way, and the truths behind the triumph. Steep, A Black Neurosurgeon's Journey is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, bookshop.org, and everywhere books are sold. And for everything about Craig, you can visit Craig Yorke at Craig, Craig, and Yorke, Yorke, CraigYorke.com. Follow him on Facebook. And Craig, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Ira. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Fascinating book. I want to quote from your note to a reader, if I might. It's a little long, but it sets the tone, I think, in a way.
Sure.
And I'm starting the quote. I felt the impulse to write this book as I faced the Black Studies shelves of our local bookstore. It began as a letter to our sons. I marveled at the indisputable truth in those books, the scholastic rigor, pages brimming with courage, trauma, and righteous fury. Their diagnosis of America's racial illness was brilliant, the prognosis bleak, but I found little mention of treatment and wondered where my story could find shelf space. I felt dwarfed by the forces they described, felt as powerless as any viewer of cable news. If these authors held the whole truth, my life hadn't amounted to much. There was more to be said, value to be added, end quote. Well, that's quite an observation. And given your background and your professional accomplishments, I can't imagine you feeling insignificant after perusing a bookshelf at a bookstore.
Well, I think that those books, take 1619 Project, for example, those those books are about gigantic historical forces, and they tend to dwarf the life of an individual. You're left knowing not you're left not knowing what to do after you've written your letter to the congressman, after you've voted, after you've marched in the protest and so forth. That's what I meant by there was not much room for remedy or the life of an individual in that shelf. And I thought that this book might actually lengthen the Black Studies shelf an inch or two and make room for the story of an individual, someone who doesn't get an NBA contract, who doesn't get a Netflix deal, who wasn't addicted to crack and shot by the police and so forth. This story does not come from desperate poverty. It comes from kind of the lower rungs of the middle class, the Black middle class. And I don't see a lot of those stories. And I don't see a lot of stories from that segment of white ethnic America either. And I think that there's a lot of stories like mine that just haven't been given voice.
Do you think that part of it too is cultural rather than racial?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'll tell you a little story. When I was in high school, incredibly competitive public high school, um, there was a kid there who was Ukrainian, and I knew him a little bit, but at a reunion years later, he said, when I was in the 10th grade, I brought home a bad grade. And my mother went nuts. She said, everybody on our block is Ukrainian, and you're the only one getting a good education. I can't show myself on the street if you're getting bad grades. You are the representative of our our ethnic group. So get your act together. So I'm just trying to say that the story resonates past blackness.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's what I got from it. And I grew up in a mixed neighborhood, so and also a working class neighborhood as well.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm able to see it from a different perspective than typical upper middle class or wealthy Caucasians, particularly, who have a
Hmm.
stereotyped view, as I
Hmm.
believe,
Hmm. Hmm.
of Black people and Hispanics, etc. I grew up with Hispanics, Black, Asian, etc. And in fact, I was in the minority. So I'm able to, and in a poor neighborhood. So I'm able to see it at a different level. So that's why I bring up the cultural
Yeah.
rather than the racial aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, your parents obviously had something going for them that allowed you to be competitive, or maybe compelled you to be competitive. I know it may
Well,
be either way.
yeah. I mean, one hard truth is that my parents were very much wounded by the racism in Boston in the 20s and the 30s. And they treated that wound by forging their only kid into a weapon. Basically, I was raised to be a weapon against their experience. And that is a lot of trouble to bear. It's a problem with surrogacy. It's a problem with really not being able to live your own life. Um, I had a lot of success in the world's eyes, but that was a difficult starting point. They were among the they were among the angriest people I've ever known,
Hmm.
and also among the smartest.
Were you aware at an early age that you were, I'm going to put this in quotes, a project of theirs in the sense of your mission is to be this weapon?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you keep from, though, you mentioned that they were angry. How did you keep from being angry at them for forcing you into a role that certainly was successful, clearly, in your practice and in your studies and in your life and in your kids and family, etc. But it's how do you keep from generating anger within yourself, knowing that you were being, I don't want to say forced into this role, but maybe compelled might be a better term.
Yeah. Well, I think that in the 1950s, as I was growing up in the 1960s, rebellion was not an option. Uh, if I were to talk back, if I were to rebel, uh, my father would just say, here is the situation that we face. You know, your your path is narrow and it's steep, um, but there really is no alternative here. Um, and he could back that up with reams of horrific stuff about young black kids who strayed from the path that they had laid out. Um, and that's kind of what is worked out in the book a bit.
Hmm.
Steep has two meanings. The adjective is the obvious Horatio Alger climb from a difficult beginning to being a Harvard trained brain surgeon. But the second meaning is more interesting to me, which is the adjective. What happens to a pot of tea? What happens to the boundaries of a person's self as they start to understand how their history has shaped them.
Were you able to avoid passing that on to your children?
I was very lucky in that. My goodness, I was lucky. Um, yeah, I went through life decades heavily armored against American culture. But my boys, our boys, that's one hole in the book. I really wanted to say more about them, but they vetoed it. They just said, it's your book, we're not in it.
Right.
Um, but they have been able to confront their own challenges, and they didn't need the armor that kind of weighed me down for many decades.
Do you find now after writing the book that the armor has been taken off?
I do. I can recommend to anybody the process of writing your story. It is the cheapest therapy you'll ever get. If you undertake it honestly, and if you look hard at your past, what was great and what hurt, uh, the closer you get to it, the more friendly you get with it, um, the more conscious you become of it. And a little bit of freedom, a sliver of freedom begins to appear. So, yeah, immensely grateful for the time and the space to write this.
Did you find that writing it not only was, I'll use this overused term, a catharsis for you, clearly, because it did unburden you with some of the armor. Obviously, some I think stays with you no matter what because it started at an early age. So what are you going to
Of
do?
course. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, but when you were writing the book, you had choices to make about what you wanted to emphasize and what you wanted to
Mhm.
de-emphasize.
Yep.
And if I were to ask you, well, I'm being redundant by saying if I were to ask you, I'm just going to ask you. So occasionally I do get into that rut of being, I hate it when people do that. But at any rate, when you look at maybe the top three things that you wrote about within the book that you feel people can learn from reading your book, and again, it's called Steep, a Black Neurosurgeon's Journey by Dr. Craig Yorke. Are there three things in particular that you want people to take away from reading the book that can not necessarily change their lives, but give them insight into the larger society or even to another human being?
Mm. I'll start with a hard talk I had with our younger son when he was about 14. He was already taller than me, and I was getting in his face about what to do. And I was rising to the occasion, and he stopped me and he said, "Dad, do not tell me what to do. Tell me what you did."
Hmm.
And that stopped me. And so Steep is scenes from a life. It's not a sermon. There are no victims, no villains to speak of in Steep. As far as three things, I would say if you pushed me and said, "What's the takeaway?" The takeaway is to wake up, to become conscious of where you're from, what your past is, what you're afraid of, what you crave, and use your memory to liberate yourself. By the way, that's a hole in the book. I wanted to end it with a few lines from a favorite poem of mine, a poem called Four Quartets, written, it's the last poem T.S. Eliot ever wrote, and he thought it was his best one. And it has to do with memory. This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but the expanding of love beyond desire. And so liberation from the past and the future also. So that's the takeaway. And the readers are people like me, people who felt boxed in or feel boxed in by their identity, people who are successful and at the same time dissatisfied, people who feel like, in Paul Simon's words, they're a face at the edge of the banquet. People who want to know more about neurosurgery than you can learn in watching The Pit, uh, and people who think that bigotry is old news. Those are the readers.
Well, yeah, I think bigotry is never old news, but the way society handles it has changed over the decades. And that's
Indeed.
where I sometimes think people don't differentiate, that they come to it with the understanding that there's bigotry and that nothing has changed and it's going to always be that way. And
Mm,
yet it has clearly changed in terms of societies and government's response to that over a period of time. And you can't outlaw bigotry, it's in people's minds and hearts.
mhm,
You can define and redefine and motivate behavior or criminalize behavior, but you can't
mhm,
really, at this
mhm,
point, control people's thoughts. So, and that's always going to be a given, but that shouldn't bigotry should not stop you from doing what you want to do. It clearly, in your
Yeah.
case, didn't stop you from what you want to do. And I mean, you had a long haul because you were a neurosurgeon, which is not something where you can learn online or you can take a night course and then start
Yeah.
doing that. So
Here, here's a point of takeaway. Um, I had walked a very steep path to get to be an academic neurosurgeon. And in 1979, I married the love of my life, and looked at jobs in 1980, and by happenstance came to a job in Topeka, Kansas, which we gave 6 months to that job. Turned down the assistant professor's job at UCLA and Emory and Pittsburgh and went to Topeka. That was a real fork in the road, and looking back, it was a very good decision.
what made you make that decision? Because again, you're talk about fish out of water in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
You're in middle America and you come from an urban background.
I was definitely bicoastal, no doubt
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, part of it was ethics. When I was the chief resident at UCSF, every Friday, well, every day actually, but every Friday, I would man a phone to take referrals into the university from the whole Bay Area. And a lot of those patients coming in had had misadventures in spinal surgery. And once we got to see them, it was obvious they never should have been near the OR in the first place. And at that time, there were more neurosurgeons in the Bay Area than in the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
And all these were nice guys, nice fellows, but they had an expectation of an income that they needed to meet. And when I looked at jobs in LA and Atlanta and Pittsburgh, I thought, these are heavily peopled markets. These are over-doctored, if you will. And the ethical pressures are real. So that was one motivator. The second motivator was I'd spent over 30 years climbing hierarchies, you know, and to be an assistant professor at a major university was to be at the bottom rung of yet another hierarchy when you're in your early 30s. So I thought maybe it's time to give adulthood a try, fatherhood a try, home ownership, you kind of get off the academic escalator. So those were the motivators.
Sure.
And it was a dramatic cross-country trip in an aging fancy German car. You may have read it. Uh, but we got to Topeka close to midnight of our fourth day. Temperature's 93 degrees. We crossed the Rubicon.
But you made it home.
Well, home is now Topeka, thank you.
That's what I mean. You made it home
Yeah,
in more ways than one, I guess.
yeah,
When you wrote the book, did you share it with your family and did they give you some feedback on it? I know that you mentioned earlier that your children didn't want you to feature them too much in terms
yeah.
of their stories, but did you share it with them and did you get a good response from, or was it a surprise of some of the things they discovered about their father and husband?
I think there was a surprise. My wife, Mary, is a shy person. She didn't want to be included. And I said, how are you going to write a memoir without talking about the love of your life? So I persuaded her to be in there. Our sons gave really great feedback. Some of my vocabulary is too much that of a boomer, and we had, we had a big debate about whether to use the word ghetto. They said ghetto is a popular term now. It doesn't have the impact that it did when you were a kid, Dad. And there were other suggestions like that. I did learn that ghetto is, you know, I think it comes from a neighborhood in, oh, I think Rome. like 13th century. It referred to where the Jews had to live,
Right.
who had to tan hides. And that it's an Italian word. I didn't know that.
And I move forward in time, obviously, to Europe
Oh,
during
of
with the
course. Yeah.
Nazis, et cetera,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then bringing it up in today's world as well. I'm going to do a non-sequential jump here and just ask you about the cover of the book, which features a Purkinje cell,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is an interesting cell. But why is that on the cover versus a picture of you or some abstract version of your journey?
Uh, Good question. I knew from the start I wanted that cover, but I didn't know why. And I've come to understand that I put that on the cover to set a very high bar for the text. I mean, if people judge a book by its cover, that is a really tough bar to meet. It's a pen and ink drawing done in about 1895 by a guy named Cajal. And his drawings, done freehand from looking down a microscope, basically created what we call neuroscience today. Uh, he had a really strange upbringing, and as he was looking through the microscope at these cells, he couldn't photograph them, but he drew them. And in 1902, he went to a big meeting and confronted the leading lights of physiology at the time and said, "You guys are all wrong. The brain is composed of individual cells, although I can't see the separations. Not only are they individual, but they communicate electrically. I can't prove that either, but I know that because of the way they're structured. And finally, I know that they change their form as an organism learns." And the usual end to that story is the guy is laughed out of the room. But instead, he turned the whole field upside down and won the Nobel Prize for medicine, the only anatomist ever to do it. Now, furthermore, those cells, each one of us has about 15 million at the bottom of our brain. And what they do is restrain excessive muscle tone. So if you want to pick up a cup of coffee, if you want your eyes to track across a line of print, you can't do it without those cells. And the cells are exquisite listeners. All of the superstructure is for listening to where we are in the world. And they speak with only one axon. So it's it's an incredible symbol of unity, of art, creativity, imagination, courage. So the book has got a ways to go if it's going to come up to that cover.
Well, you set the pace, right?
I don't know. The readers will judge.
That, fair enough, fair enough. Do you feel after writing the book, again, it's called Steep, A Black Neurosurgeon's Journey by Dr.
So
Craig.
it is. So it is.
Do you feel there's another book in you?
I felt driven to write this. I don't feel that drive right now. Other people have asked me. I certainly enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process. I mean, I enjoyed making sentences work. I agree with Mark Twain that the right word really is lightning, and the almost right one is a lightning bug. I really agree with that. I really agree with poetic economy. And I write with my ears. So yeah, I enjoyed the process. Maybe I'll write something else, but for now, I'm trying to make sense of what I've just done and talk to folks like you and see what kind of audience this little book might have.
You write in your book, there was one incident where there's a patient that came in who was in an accident, and they take away the helmet and all that, and there's a, a white power insignia on him.
Mhm.
So you can have more than one reaction to that. You have a reaction to it as a human, you have a reaction to it as a neurosurgeon. How was your reaction to it? And I guess the larger question is for that is, can you separate all your different identities when it's something like that?
Well, as you steep your persona, you become aware of more than one identity inside you. In that moment, what happened was my training, which had been very severe, just clicked in. I mean, I treated him like I would treat anybody else. Um, as I thought about it more, I thought about why I wasn't angry. You know, I mean, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. This guy is in a bad way, and you got to get to page 120 to see what happened to him.
Fair
He's
enough.
introduced on page one, but I wasn't afraid, and so therefore I wasn't angry. For me, the fear always came first.
The reason I bring that up too from a larger canvas, which is that more and more medical students, and I think it's part of the curriculum, a lot of these medical students seem to have become politicized in the sense that the Hippocratic Oath seems to be moving slightly to the side and is more of a identity. Would you treat someone who you disagree with, who is a different religion or a different
Mhm,
nationality or a different
mhm,
culture
mhm.
or a different race? And I'm concerned about that movement in the medical community because I've always grown up with the understanding that when you, as in your book, if you're a doctor, regardless of who the patient is, you treat the patient.
Yeah, that would certainly be an unwelcome development, what you're describing. I mean, I think that it goes to the larger move toward identity politics and, you know, getting into identity silos. Not a good look for a multiracial democracy.
It's identity, which is ideology, unfortunately, and that's when ideology takes precedence over reality or biology or other
Yeah,
aspects of society. Before I let you go, what would this is definitely narrowing it because we talked about some of the top two or
yeah.
three things you'd like people to take away. What's your message to people after writing this book who are going to be reading it? And are they going to be reading it through a certain prism, or are you aiming the book at everybody?
In my mind, everybody could find some value in this story,
I like that. That's short and to the point. Perfect.
just like the book, man.
Exactly. A great way to end it. My guest has been Greg Yorke. He's author of Steep, a Black Neurosurgeon's Journey. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And for everything about Craig, and it's Craig, go to Craig Yorke, Yorke, CraigYorke.com, and follow him on Facebook. Craig, thanks for being on the show.
Many thanks for having me.
Thank you. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.